welcome to this very special and unique event online. I will remind you to please keep your microphones muted throughout the session so that we can ensure the best quality of sound. And I am Wilka Roig, and I am part of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation team, and I will be here to help facilitate the meeting. So that's who I am and why I'm here. And so please keep your microphones muted. I will keep you muted if you accidentally unmute yourself as well as I can. And if you have questions that come up throughout the session, I invite you to write them in the chat. The chat is at the bottom of your screen. And you can please preface your question with the word question so that it's easier for us to find it in the chat when we come to the question and answer section. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And I will pass the mic on to Dorothy Davis.
Thank you, Wilka, and thank you everybody for joining this afternoon. We have been very excited about offering an event that really speaks to your love, your loss related to COVID. As a way of an introduction, I wanted to share a little bit about our Camp Stars and about Hospice Atlanta, and about why I feel like this is the right moment for us to speak to loss a little differently than how we have historically offered bereavement. Hospice Atlanta was one of the first hospices that started in Georgia in 1975. Camp Stars, which was founded in 1994 as an offshoot and an extension of our pediatric hospice program. And at that point in time, it was focused for kids who have experienced loss. And so it was a kids camp. We expanded that in 2007 to a bereavement camp to families, and extended to once a year, twice a year. And then now in 2021, we are experiencing something unprecedented, not only within our own organization, but around the world. And we believe bereavement and grief is really something that we have a shared experience about over the last 14 months. We think now's the time to move from our spring camp to an event that really offers the work of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, which will be introducing. Ken, her son, will be sharing more about it, but also to speak to all the losses that we all have experienced over the course of this last 14, 15 months. From the perspective as the CEO of Visiting Nurse Hospice Atlanta, our nurses and therapists and chaplains and social workers have been with families over the last 14 months, providing over 2,500 visits every week, caring for folks in hospice and through our palliative, through our home health and our community care. And first, I want to honor all of our staff who have taken this challenge, who have served our community, and often, especially in those first few months, picked up the call and really went into their hearts in the mission of our organization and served patients. I really think this is dedicated to them, because loss, many of our own employees, frontline workers, made choices to care for folks and had experienced a lot of losses as they were juggling their own children not having school, and continue to make choices to extend themselves and through their work to take care of families and our patients. I do want to say this is quite an honor for our organization to host this event as a Camp Stars event. We have been leading in the bereavement area, and I want to stop for a minute and honor Barbara Moore. I also want to say thank you to Denise Greenberg, one of our early facilitators of Camp Stars since inception, and say it takes the leadership and the commitment of many people to care for people. And I want to say thank you. So with that, I want to hand it over to our two speakers today, Ken Ross and Dianne Gray, both of whom will share the work of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, Ken being her son and has extended and speaks to her legacy and continues to honor her work around the world through the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. Dianne Gray, thank you for joining us as well. You have been our introduction to the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. We started a partnership over 6 years ago. When we had our Hospice Atlanta Center, we had a library dedicated to her work. We had a tapestry honoring all the work that she has brought forward around the world. So thank you, and I'm very excited to have you both as our speakers and guests and look forward to learning and being a part of this experience. Ken?
Ken, we can't hear you for some reason.
How's this? Is that better?
Yes, perfect, yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for sharing part of your day with us. We're honored to have you. And thank you to everybody, of course, at Hospice Atlanta. We've had a nice, lovely journey together for the last few years. And thank you, Wilke and Dianne. My mom, I see in the press, she's kind of represented in a certain way, which I never really think it captures her mission, her work, her legacy. And so hopefully in the next few minutes, I can kind of clarify her mission and share a few thoughts with you about how she dealt with life and loss and grief and the entire, human existence. And her gift, because she was a simple Swiss country doctor, was to break ideas down that were maybe a little nebulous for some people, like when you talk about grief, like what are you talking about? How do you digest grief? How do you attain hope? And Elisabeth really had this beautiful gift of speaking in simple terms and breaking down the kind of fundamental emotions and elements of our human experience. And so hopefully I'm going to share that with you in the next few minutes here as best I can. As you may know, Elisabeth wrote this book on death and dying, and it's been published 51 years now. The book is still selling really well. It's now in 43 languages. After 50 years, just in the last year, we had new editions in Albanian, Arabic, Farsi, Mongolian. It's really incredible to see the way this book just takes on an entire life of its own and just continues through different cultures and different generations. It's really amazing. And a lot of people come to me and say, hey, Ken, your mom wrote that one great book. And I say, well, yeah, she did write that one great book, but she was very prolific. And if you can imagine, she began her work with the dying basically when she was about 40 years old, and she retired in her 60s. And in this time, she wrote all these books. She did vet projects, AIDS projects, jail projects, was fundamental in the hospice movement. She traveled around the world. She had a working farm. She was a mother, a doctor, so when people say, I don't have time to do all that, that's nonsense. If she can do all that in 25 years, imagine what you can accomplish if you just set your mind to it. So of course I have to mention a little bit about the 5 stages. It's often misunderstood, misrepresented. If we actually take a look back on Death and Dying on page 251, we see this chart. And as you can clearly see, the chart has more than 5 stages, because on the left side is how the press represents it. And on the right side is what Elisabeth actually talked about. So you see, she's talking about shock, preparatory grief, partial denial. And hope is the biggest stage of all. And yet nobody ever mentions that as part of Elisabeth's work, right? And even back when she began her work with the dying and talking about these stages, she said, these are just, some ideas I want to share with you, because back then grief was considered kind of a monolithic idea. And what Elisabeth was trying to represent was that the stages show us that grief is complex. So when people say, oh, well, Elisabeth didn't understand that grief is complex and there's no stages, I say, well, that's exactly what she was trying to point out. because I've seen my mother talk about at least 14 stages, right? And you don't have to use the word stages. You can use phases, you can use periods, you can use whatever you want, but people get hung up on the word and the idea of stages and that you have to go through them to somehow graduate and come to acceptance. And that's not at all what Elisabeth was trying to say. So let's get past this idea that there's 5 stages and they're not linear. They can happen concurrently. You can have no stages. It's not a recipe for success. It's just one model that Elisabeth started using in the 60s to explain to us that grief is a very complex thing. Now, after a couple of years, Elisabeth was hearing that people began thinking that these were linear, this was a linear concept. So she repeatedly, in many different forms, tried to express that it wasn't just 5 stages and it wasn't just linear. So here on the left side, you see a chart that Elisabeth actually drew in the 70s. And you see at the very top is hope. And you see how everything is interrelated, overlapping, and it's not linear at all. On the right side, the 5 stages began to be known as the 5 stages of grief, then the 5 stages of loss, then it became the Kübler-Ross grief cycle. And you see Elisabeth here is using different words so you don't get hung up on those 5 words, that each of those words really encompasses a lot of different emotions. And then from the grief cycle, it has now become the Kübler-Ross change curve. And again, on the left side, you see hope is at the very top of everything and how you can go back and forth and back and forth. And the change curve now is used by hundreds and hundreds of corporations to explain change and loss, because what the 5 stages really identify is a defense mechanism. So it could be a defense mechanism against grief or loss of a job or loss of a marriage or anything, a loss of a pet. So, it's a very fluid thing, and people, unfortunately represent it as being this rigid structure, when in fact, it's a very, very kind of basic explanation of a much more complicated story that Elisabeth was trying to share with us. So besides 5 stages, one thing that was super important in Elisabeth's work was the 4 quadrants. She said, if we're trying to obtain a healthy outlook or trying to treat a patient or trying to make ourselves better, we have to deal with the 4 quadrants of our bodies, our souls, so that includes the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, the spiritual. She said, if we don't treat others and ourselves with these 4 quadrants, we're going to be out of balance and we can never attain true health. So everything in my mom's work, can be seen as a circle or a wheel. Her autobiography was called The Wheel of Life because she was really into that concept of wheels and circles that she picked up from indigenous people traveling. When she began her group in California, Shantinalaya, you can see she was talking about the psychological, the spiritual healing, the physical. And when she did this booklet for a dying child on the right, the Dougie letter, again, the book is full of circles and wheels, showing that life and death is connected. Everything is a circle, and we should accept that and have that as a healthy part of our life and not looking at everything as moving forward, but we do come back to where we began. So again, I honestly talk about loss, but what does that mean in a practical sense? How do I approach trying to deal with my loss, trying to find hope? And so Elisabeth has beautiful, simple language. And today I'm going to talk about some of these kind of elemental emotions that Elisabeth talked about and see how they play into finding hope during grief and loss and making our lives better by just thinking of things in these terms that Elisabeth would often talk about. So let's talk about love. I think modern medicine has become a prophet offering a life free of pain. It is nonsense. The only thing I know that truly heals people is unconditional love. That was one of my mom's most fundamental ideas, is that we all need to have unconditional love. And people say, well, where do I find that? And say, well, of course, Elisabeth said children are a source of unconditional love. Our pets, our families, any of our passions are sources of unconditional love. We can love just hobbies. We can love many different things that don't, qualify us, that don't judge us. So that's what we're all looking for fundamentally. Love is the source of truth, energy, grace, and power. So, a very, very much cornerstone of Elizabeth's work was the idea of love being preeminent in everything she did. And another fundamental, which she said we often overlook, especially as caregivers, is that self-love is as important as any kind of love we experience. From an early age, we're often given conditional love. We're loved if we get good grades, we behave well. And so she said, everything in society is focused towards the opposite of what she would see as a healthy kind of love. So we have to focus on unconditional love. Anytime you want to jump in, Dianne, feel free. Okay.
Thank you.
So next, anger. Elizabeth said, again, like everything in society she thought was kind of backwards. She said, we're always taught not to express our anger. But Elizabeth said, that's totally wrong. We need to express our anger. The whole idea of us suppressing emotions is unhealthy. We need to externalize. That's how we find healing in loss. She said, everyone doesn't talk to you honestly. They stay away. They don't want to talk about the topic. And we need to externalize our pain. Otherwise, we can't move through it. So it's important to feel anger without judging it, without attempting to find meaning to it. It may take many forms: anger at the healthcare system, at your life, at loved ones for leaving you too early. Life is unfair and death is unfair. So, she said in Western society, everything was kind of backwards on this concept of anger. Anger, of course, is part of the 5 stages that she initially talked about, and anger is a very necessary stage of grieving. She say anger is healthy, bargaining is healthy, denial is healthy when it's done, in a manner that will help you move through it. We don't want to stay in that particular zone, that phase, that emotion, or whatever you want to call it, but we need to kind of embrace it and examine it. So anger is healthy, according to Elisabeth. Anger often masks other feelings, such as fear. Again, all these emotions, as I showed on the wheel, are overlapping. So anger is composed of many emotions. Fear, is a result of other emotions as well. So we need to kind of examine, identify what's going on internally. Some people use verbal language, some people use nonverbal language, which Dianne's going to talk about. But we really need to honestly examine ourselves and others who are going through grief. Anger can have no limits. Elisabeth thought this was a problem because if people who don't channel anger in a healthy manner are going to have trouble moving through it. So we have to find healthy ways in which we can express our anger. Anger is often directed at God in cases of loss and grief. This is kind of the classical form. And anger is a feeling that bridges other feelings that have no form. Yes, so she said, anger is often our inability to express what we're really feeling because we haven't examined ourselves. Elisabeth did these workshops called the Life, Death, and Transition workshops. And she got about 100 people together in a room, and through a particular kind of group psychology that she had studied under Jung and others, she developed this idea that people needed to externalize whatever anger, whatever losses they've experienced. And she got 100 people to open up very honestly in front of each other, strangers. And she said that was the key that she found, was this externalization through these workshops that she did.
Can
Yes.
can you address, for example, so as you'll hear in this presentation, Ken speaks eloquently about his mom's philosophies and her just methodology, quite honestly. But also too, one of the things that you'll hear in this presentation are the 2 sides of it. So what does that look like practically? Ken, can you address how your mom, one of her exercises, how she used to encourage people, what she would say, to pop using the mattress and the hose or the phone book? Because I think it's such a powerful example of putting your mom's philosophy to practical experience. You're muted.
How's that? So, sorry, I keep seeing the light going off when I don't talk. It's like on a sleep mode or something. Anyway, my mom had this beautiful technique that she developed, but she said the key to everything when we're working with dying patients, if we're healthcare workers, doctors, even if we're working with ourselves or our family, is that we have to be able to develop listening skills. She said listening was a key to everything, and that's what she did in the workshops. And she said, you just don't listen with your ears, you listen with your heart, your soul, your intuition, and really important, you have to kind of clear out your own space, because she said if you don't work on your unfinished work, you're never going to be able to be a good therapist or a doctor or a nurse, because people are going to sense that you have an issue with death or you have an issue with loss, and they're going to be able to pick that up. So she said to work with people, you've got to, excuse me, it's allergy season here. You've got to work on your own unfinished business. And when you do that, then you can do the workshops, and then you could be a great therapist. So she would have a way of reading people, which, I've never seen before. We had like 100 people at a workshop once, and there was one person who wouldn't participate. So she asked him to come into the circle, and he said, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, but I'm really dead inside. There's nothing you can do to get me to participate in this group. And so my mom sat there for 5, 10, 15 minutes, didn't say a word. And her assistants thought, wow, this guy really stumped Elisabeth this time. And so finally she said, let's sing a song. So my mother picked the song, and they all started to sing it. 100 people started to sing the song, and this man in the middle started crying uncontrollably. And he cried for like 10 minutes after the song was over. And when he composed himself, he said, that was a song I used to sing to my son before he died. So how did my mother pick that one song? That's the level at which she was able to connect to people. I've never seen it before or since, but, she says we all have this ability, but she had an incredible innate sense of picking up things,
Well, I
Mhm.
think in part, Ken, to what you're saying is it's intuitive listening, and we
Right.
did a class on that through the Elisabeth
Right.
Kübler-Ross Foundation. I taught active listening and intuitive listening, but also too, your mom used to do this practice, because I'm reading through your list here that anger is a necessary stage of grieving. Anger is healthy. It often masks other feelings such as fear. That's all great, but I think sometimes people take that as license to just be angry and directed toward another person. And your mom really never said, this gives you license to be unkind. This gives you
Right.
license to go and pummel your neighbor with your words. But what your mom did do is she asked people to, first of all, examine their anger and label it. And instead of hurling insult, you learn to use your words, which is, I am angry. And to recognize that anger is often, to her point, it's often fear, that we are not really always angry. We're often fearful. So what do we do with the anger? And your mom had this practice of asking people to sit on a mattress on the floor, all grown up, and sit on the floor, and she would give them a section of hose, or she would give them these phone books. Can you talk about that?
Well, that would be a whole workshop in itself, but
Yeah,
yes.
but it was cool.
My mom has 2 books on that. And there's also a website called the externalizationworkshops.com. And you are welcome to contact any of those therapists that conduct workshops now, such as Larry Lincoln, Shep Jeffries, Jacob Watson. They're all licensed therapists who worked with Elisabeth and conduct workshops. And if you think a workshop might be good for you, definitely go to the externalizationworkshops.com. But yeah, I don't think we have time to, I have 30
No,
minutes
but
to go
just
through them.
the premise of the premise was that, as you exhibit physical release and you would pound on these phone books with the hose or pound on the mattress, the anger that was inside of you would release. That was the whole.
Right. But I think it should be done with a licensed therapist, not probably on your own.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, loss. Should you shield the canyons from the windstorms, you would never see the true beauty of their carvings. So Elisabeth, was saying that loss is a part of all our lives. It's a natural part of our lives. And, we all need to kind of examine it and try to be open to it. And the earlier we do this, the better, because unfortunately, it's the people who don't deal with loss who have the biggest problems and sometimes pass on those problems to other people as well. So she says, you have to temper the iron. Every hardship is an opportunity that you were given, an opportunity to grow. To grow is the sole purpose of existence on this planet. Elisabeth was not religious per se, but she was highly spiritual. And even though she wasn't religious, she had a picture of Jesus by her bed, which everyone found very ironic, but she loved Jesus. And she talked about things very much in a spiritual sense, and some people possibly a religious sense. And she often talked about God. She talked about reincarnation. She had talked to thousands of people who had died and come back on operating tables, motorcycle accidents. And some of them said, outstanding things that they had talked to people who had crossed over. And so she never, of course, had a fear of death. And she said, none of us should have a fear of death. It's just a natural part of life. But obviously it's a tough experience, and we have to find ways to deal with its loss. So she say, what if anything is truly ours? Physical, material things, jobs, cars, ownership. She say the only thing that lasts forever is unconditional love. Both my parents were doctors, and my father did not believe in life after death, and my mother believed in life after death. So it made for very interesting conversations at the dinner table, as you can imagine. So, especially as kids, like, will we have to hear about this again? We grew up meeting lots of dying people. I'd go to my father's hospital. I'd go to the autopsy rooms. It was a very unusual existence, but it really did teach me a lot and taught me to face death and think about life and not waste, my anger on little things and frustrations, and really see the big picture and always try to focus on happy, progressive things to fill my life, because I know everything is temporal. And it was a great tutorial as a kid, but it took me a while to digest it. Fear. Elisabeth said, fear is a thing that just shuts down everything and really kills our experience. She said, the reason people are afraid to die is because they've been afraid to live fully. She said, people who live fully are never afraid to die because they haven't wasted this beautiful opportunity we have, this beautiful gift of life. So we always criticize the things in other people that we fear the most in ourselves because we haven't examined ourselves. We haven't done the work of our unfinished business. We come back to that idea. So it's not the end of the physical body that should worry us. Rather, the concern must be to live while we're alive. Right? She was always teaching us as kids, go out, be a little crazy, go take chances. I studied banking, but I became a photographer without any training. And I had this beautiful, amazing life, seeing the world. And, I lived my mother's lessons of challenging my fears, because you realize when you get to the end of your life, all these fears are so silly. Did I wear the right clothes? Did I say the right things? Did I have the right car? All these things are meaningless when you get to the end of your life, right? So if you use that perspective of thinking of everything from the end of your life and looking back, it puts things in a beautiful perspective that you find out what's important, which again is unconditional love. The people in your life, these are the important things, not the stuff, right? So we need to focus on relationships, on love, on challenging our fears. You have to open up and let the pain move through you. It's not yours to keep. Dealing with loss should be a process. It shouldn't be a roadblock. It shouldn't be the end of things. She'd say relationships continue with people who have died before, right? I mean, you still love them. Sometimes you still talk to them. You think about them, you have the love, you have the experiences. They live on through your heart, through your soul, through your mind, right? So, but you have to process the pain, whether it's going to a grief counselor, externalization workshops, journaling, whatever the process you want to choose, you have to process things. It doesn't happen automatically. It takes work. Many people's entire lives are wasting on trying to control fear. We should seek our authentic selves. My mom was definitely very outspoken. She didn't live her life by fears. She was constantly told she can't do things, and she did them anyway. I think she's a testament to that. So, yeah, and I mean, I used to be afraid of public speaking. I used to be afraid of, whatever, taking a chance and becoming a photographer. So, all these fears I've conquered in my life have been these beautiful gifts because it has got me to relax. And, I wasn't very social when I was young, and I really felt I missed a lot of opportunities. So, I think challenging these fears is like just fundamental to Elisabeth's work. Just think about the end and what you want to look back and what do you want to fill your life with. Find the meaning of your life. What are your gifts? What can you give to others? What can you share with others? Let them share with you. Don't wait till it's too late to say things to loved ones. Whatever you want to do within reason, do it now. So, anticipatory grief, which is kind of a popular idea these days, was something that Elisabeth identified back in the 60s, and it's in her original book on death and dying. Back then it was called preparatory grief. But, this preparatory grief, she says, one of the biggest challenges that we have when we're trying to face a healthy and balanced life, right? Where you're already afraid about losing things, losing your job, losing your marriage, losing, but she'd say loss is a part of life. We have to accept that. We have to just embrace it and make it ours, and just be able to step back and process it. Guilt was another thing that was, along with fear, just really stops us from living fully. So my mom said, the opinion of which other people have of you is their problem. So Elisabeth was constantly criticized in her work. First, she was criticized for working with dying patients. That was considered inappropriate, and telling them that they were dying. And then she was criticized for talking about life after death and talking about spiritualism, and then she was criticized for working with AIDS patients. It's just a constant parade of criticisms. But my mother said, these are just other people expressing their unfinished business. So many guilts are imposed upon us from society because obviously we're not born with guilts. Desire to please others becomes a breeding ground for guilt, right? We're just letting someone else put their stuff or their unfinished business on us. Guilt is often rooted in other emotions such as fear. We're going back to the chart again. All these emotions are not singular things. They overlap and are caused by other emotions and flow back and forth between different emotions and are expressed in other emotions. We cannot possibly love in a free and healthy manner with guilt crushing our souls. The guilt leads to imbalances, which damages ourselves and us, of course, right? So, guilt and fear stop us from living full, rich lives with meaning, right? So our job is like a janitor of our soul. We got to get rid of the fear, got to get rid of the guilt, move on, live in a healthy, balanced fashion, dealing with the four quadrants. Guilt is perhaps the most painful companion of death. So, a lot of people would say, oh my God, my friend died and I never got a chance to tell them I loved them, or I wasn't angry at them anymore. So again, we have to live in the present. We have to live today, and we have to live our lives without guilt. Guilt and time are closely connected. Since guilt comes from the past, it keeps the past alive. So guilt is something we all have to work on. I've got to work on time because I'm going over. So begin each day and live it to the fullest as if it were the only one we had. So time is absolute and yet completely intangible. So, how do we deal with time? Sometimes we forget that we have a limited time on this earth, and we need to focus on things now and not let things slip by until it's too late. That includes relationships, includes expressing love, anything in your life. We have to realize that the clock is ticking and we have to experience things now. In the West, time gives us more experience, and yet we devalue the old. Elisabeth really loved these indigenous peoples around the world. I traveled with her to about 20 different countries, and we always used to visit the Maoris and the Aboriginals and the Zulu tribes people, because she really thought they really understood life so well. And she said in the West, like so much of our education she thought was counterintuitive, I guess. Time is about learning lessons. Time is perspective. If we learn to live without fear and guilt, it doesn't matter how long we'll live because we'll live full, rich, meaningful lives. Again, like all these concepts are part of the circle of dealing with loss. Consciously or not, we're all on a quest for answers, trying to learn the lessons of life. We grapple with fear and guilt. We search for meaning, love, and power. We try to understand fear, loss, and time. Again, the 5 stages are really kind of a circle, as I showed you in that earlier chart. Acceptance. My mother used to love to say this. She had a t-shirt that said this: I'm not okay, you're not okay, but that's okay, right? She said, we've all got damage, we've all got stuff, we've all got unfinished business, but that's okay. We're not meant to be perfect, we're human beings, right? And if we can accept that, that's part of one of the stepping stones to moving forward. So it's not the end of the physical body. Again, that worries us. Rather, we should be concerned about living life fully. So my mother would call me and she'd say, Kenneth, let's go cause some mischief. Let's go be naughty. Let's go ride a motorcycle. Let's get in an airplane. Let's fly over a volcano. So people thought, wow, Elisabeth, death and dying, she must have been very serious. And I'm like, no, she was like the most fun mom you could possibly imagine, right? She was always a little naughty. She'd be a little crazy, and she lived her life fully. And all that, interaction with death did not put her down. I mean, she found energy from it because she felt she was doing her calling, her mission. And, it was just a beautiful experience for her. And she was able to learn lessons from that grief and from that loss. And she'd say, we all have that ability to do that, but, it's tough work. But again, we've got to work through the pain. Acceptance does not mean you're 100% fine, but that you can have a steady peace, right? So some people say, well, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross in those stages, like acceptance, that's nonsense. You're going to be changed forever by the loss. Yes, you will be, but everything in life changes you, the good things and bad. Everything, changes you and makes you into a different person, but that's fine if you can process the loss and get a grasp of how it affects you meaningfully. I've had a lot of losses in the last 3 years. I've lost about 15 friends of mine, my cat, but the thing is, like, I haven't lived my life with regrets, and I'm always focusing on my friendships and relationships. And I make that one of the central focuses of my life. And so I go, oh my God, this friend died. I wish I had spent more time with him. I don't live that way. I really focus a lot on relationships because that's what has meaning for me. So, I try to live my life without regrets. Finding acceptance can mean having more good days than bad. Learning lessons like reaching maturity. You're not suddenly happier, more wealthy, more powerful, but you understand the world around you better and you're at peace with yourself. So that makes sense, right? I mean, going out, having experiences, embracing things, that's about acceptance. I accept that my friends are dead. It doesn't make me happy about it, but, I accept it in what I see as a healthy fashion. Learning life lessons about making your life perfect. And again, a perfect life is not perfect because I'm not okay and you're not okay, and that's okay. But just seeing how your life is meant to be. And last, we have happiness. There's no joy without hardship. If not for death, would we appreciate life? If not for hate, would we know the ultimate goal is love? At these moments, you can either hold on to your negativity and look for someone to blame, or you can choose to heal and keep on loving. So I shot this picture the week after my mom died, and just reminded me of my mom. So we're all given tools to be happy, but we often forget how to use what we've been given, right? So that's what Elisabeth was all about. Yes, it was about death, but it was also about life. And it was about loss, but it was also about love. And reminding us all that we all have these tools. She had this, way of breaking down these ideas, concepts of grief and love into ideas that we can grasp onto. And through grasping onto these ideas and finding understanding, we can deal with the loss. Happiness can be a function or a reaction to an event. A better form of happiness is finding the true meaning of life. What is the purpose you are out there or here on earth to accomplish? Some of the happiest people Elisabeth ever met were the poor. You know, I often went with her to Zimbabwe, to South America, different places. And again, you know, Elisabeth found these indigenous people who had very little material wealth were very happy. And, you know, she said, this is a big lesson for us. We need to realize, you know, that happiness is not based on material wealth, but on relationships, on love, unconditional love. Happiness is most easily achieved when the four quadrants are in balance. So here, just a brief summary of Elisabeth's ideas. We do have the 5 stages, but the 5 stages are not the 5 stages. The 5 stages after 50 years have become the Kübler-Ross change curve, finding balance between the 4 quadrants, externalizing your emotions and getting rid of your unfinished business, learning that everything in life is perspective, that loss can teach us many things, and loss can be a gain in some ways because it does give you perspective, challenging our fears and living our lives love-based and not fear-based, embracing unconditional love, including yourself, most importantly, identifying symbolic verbal and symbolic nonverbal language, which Diane's about to talk about, and finding your listening skills, which go well beyond your ears. You know, really listen to others and yourself about what, you know, you're really trying to express. What are you trying to process? So over the last 15 years, I started the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. Diane's a wonderful board member with us, and Wilka is one of our board members down in Mexico. We've got 12 different chapters in 11 countries now. I ended up taking care of my mom for the last 9 years of her life, really learned a lot more about my mom and her work and about her intentions. So we're doing a number of education series, which are happening now. We do them twice a year, roughly. We've been working on keeping my mom's legacy alive by doing a number of interviews. The BBC just did a couple of interviews. NPR is working on an interview. We're working on a feature movie, a TV show in France. We've got these chapters around the world. What else do we have, Diane? Are you with us?
I am. I think you pretty much covered it.
Okay. So I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but anyway, if you'd like to learn more about the foundation, go to ekrfoundation.org. And of course, we're on Instagram in a multitude of languages. We have websites in English, Portuguese, Flemish, French, Japanese, German. Of course, we're on Facebook. We're on just about everything except Snapchat, I think. So, and then I'll just leave you with this last quote by Muhammad Ali. It is not coincidence that the woman who taught us so much about death and dying as a process was truly the greatest champion of life. Muhammad Ali came and spent the afternoon with my mom one day, and that was really a special memory of some of my mom's crazy adventures. But we did a book called Tea with Elisabeth, and he donated a chapter to us, and that was a quote from what he wrote about Elisabeth. So anyway, thank you for sharing part of your day with me. I appreciate it. And I will turn you over to Diane next.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's see if I can get this. Yay, us. It says I will screen share. Yay. Okay, let's see if it really works. All right, we are ready to go. Everybody ready? Okay, so here's kind of what Ken and I decided to do. We decided to split the presentation today kind of into 2 parts. And the whole goal of it is so that we could really discuss Elisabeth's work and then how does it apply in the practical sense. So first of all, one of the things Elisabeth's work really drove home to me was the fact that you're not alone. I'm not alone in my grief and you're not alone in yours, that we are all connected. So I'm going to read this to you, and it's a part of an amazing lesson in Buddhism. And in this presentation, I'm really doing the one thing that Elisabeth's work taught me, which is that we are all connected all over the world. Whether you're on this presentation and you're Christian or you're Buddhist or agnostic, there's something in it for everyone. So this is the story of Kisagotami. Kisagotami, during Buddha's time, there lived a woman named Kisagotami. She married young and gave birth to a son. One day, the baby fell sick and died soon after. Kisagutami loved her son greatly and refused to believe that her son was dead. She carried the body of her son around her village, asking if there was anyone who can bring her son back to life. The villagers all saw that the son was already dead, and there was nothing that could be done. They advised her to accept his death and make arrangements for the funeral. In great grief, she fell upon her knees and she clutched her son's body close to her body. She kept uttering for her son to wake up. A village elder took pity on her and suggested to her to consult the Buddha. Kisagutami, we cannot help you, but you should go to the Buddha. Maybe he can bring your son back to life. She immediately went to the Buddha's residence and pleaded for him to bring her son back to life. Kisagutami, I have a way to bring your son back to life. My lord, I will do anything to bring my son back. If that is the case, then I need you to find me something, he said. Bring me a mustard seed, but it must be taken from a house where no one is residing in a house has ever lost a family member. Bring this seed back to me and your son will come back to life. Kisagutami went from house to house trying to find the mustard seed. At the first house, a young woman offered to give her some mustard seeds. But when Kisagutami asked if she had ever lost a family member to death, the young woman said her grandmother died a few months ago. She moved on to the second house, and a husband died a few years ago. The third house lost an uncle. The fourth house lost an aunt. And she kept moving from house to house. But the answer was always the same. Every house had lost a family member to death. Kisagutami finally came to realize that there is no one in the world who had never lost a family member to death. She now understood that death is inevitable and a natural part of life. Putting her grief aside, she buried her son in the forest, and then she returned to the Buddha to become a follower. I share that with you not to do a Buddhist teaching, but to really ask yourself, have you ever been impacted by death? Because we know that love and birth and death and grief are the great connectors in life. So it's amazing to me that we spend so much time shopping for a car on Consumer Reports, but we spend so little time really growing to understand that death is a part of life and so is grief, because they're both rooted in love. It's a very powerful life lesson. And of course, because we're doing this, my screen froze for a minute. Anyway, the message of Elisabeth's work is this, is that your grief is as individual as your fingerprint, and it's as unique as your DNA. No two people grieve exactly alike because your relationship with the person is not exactly alike. Ken and I might love the same person, but our grief will be different because our relationship with the person was different. And this can be terrifying. So many people, I taught in Sao Paulo a couple of years ago as part of a medical group and mine was on communications and spiritual care and grief. And at the end of my presentation to 250 medical students, there, so many of them raised their hands and they said, well, can you just tell us what to say? As though there was a script, right? There is no script. There's no script for death. There's no script for grief. There's no script for loss, because each relationship is different. And this can be terrifying, but it's also freeing, because you do not have to do grief like anyone else. Because the relationship that you have or you didn't have with the person that you love or love was unlike any other. And that is the whole point of it. Elisabeth's work was just extraordinary in its ability to teach us about our unique identity and relationship with death and grief. So the grief journey is going to be different as well. Elisabeth, for those of you that didn't know her work very well, she was a huge fan of Carl Jung. And Ken told me a story, and Ken, I don't know if your audio is on, but didn't
Yes.
she follow Carl through the streets or something like that at one point?
Well, sort of, but the opposite actually, that she lived in Zurich, and she used to see Carl Jung coming down the street when she was young, and she was so nervous that she'd cross to the other side of the street because she was horrified that she'd have to say something. but she wanted to follow him, and yet she was terrified because it was her biggest hero.
So as part of Elisabeth's teachings and work, she became very just emphatic about this message that I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. You know, for the grieving, there are so many things that they feel a lack of control about. I didn't choose to have my child die. I didn't choose to be in a car accident and lose my ability to walk. I didn't choose to be, you know, the caregiver. I didn't choose to be, right? So we look at that as though we're inept and we're incapable, but instead Elisabeth's work also taught us that there's no prescription, but there is choice. And one of Elisabeth's friends was Viktor Frankl. And it was really a beautiful friendship between Viktor Frankl's wife and Viktor Frankl and Elisabeth. And there's a great picture of the three of them. In Viktor Frankl's work and also logotherapy was about meaning and purpose, but everything that can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Really compelling, because we can do grief our own way too. And if you haven't read Viktor Frankl's most amazing book that changed my life, it's called Man's Search for Meaning. It's powerful. It's a short read. He wrote it in 9 days. He was a neurologist, but also a psychiatrist. He changed my life through his work. And it's basically about choice. Elisabeth wrote, when you are at the end of your life and you look back, not at the easy days, but at the tough days, at the windstorms of life, you see that the tough days are the ones that really made you what you are today. And somebody once said, according to Elisabeth, it's like putting a rock in a tumbler. You have the choice to come out crashed or polished. It's true, isn't it? So one of the things when I work with grieving people, there are a lot of questions that they have. And basically, when we start discussing choice and proactivity, we discuss nature and nurture. So a lot of my work is science-based. I would love to tell you that it's all my great ideas, but it's not. It's rooted in Elisabeth's work, but it's also rooted in contemporary research. And one of the things that happens is that, and this happens sometimes with survivors of suicide, and we work really, truly right at the heart and the core of the fundamental issues of the day. And I say, what's your day look like? Have you taken a shower? No. When was the last time you took a shower? As one person said. And she said, yesterday. And I said, okay, well, let's look at choice. What if we made a choice to take a shower? Now, while that seems rather rudimentary, there's also great science out there that talks about the fact that water is healing. And it's rooted in science and rooted in research and rooted in fMRIs that talk about how the brain reacts to being in, on, near, around, or under the water. And if you want to read a great book on it, it's called Blue Mind by Wallace J. Nichols. It's incredible. And so this woman started taking a shower every day by 2:30 by the time her kids would get home from school. Just that one simple choice. Another is about nature, because there's a great research study, and you'll receive a copy of this and all of the presentation afterward. But there's a great study from Stanford. And really, basically what it says is that people who would walk in nature 50 minutes would receive many, many benefits from walking in nature versus an urban environment. That walking in nature, it helped people decrease anxiety and rumination and negative affect. And also it did help them to receive positive cognitive benefits. And I listed on the bottom of this slide some things that you can look up if you're interested in it. The bottom line is this: movement in nature helps to soothe the brain, soothe the spirit, and it does help reframe your brain. Exercise does that, what exercise does, and to those of you who are going through grief, I really truly encourage you to participate. And even if you have to sit in a chair and do exercise that way, exercise increases your endorphins, which are natural mood lifters. It helps to get your sleep patterns back on track, and it protects the brain from damage. And also gives you a sense of accomplishment. One thing that really affects the grieving is that they lose a sense of accomplishment, they lose a sense of time. And over time, what that does is it affects the brain negatively. This is one way to jumpstart your brain immediately. It has a positive impact right away. It reduces stress, and as you can see on this slide, increases motivation. It stimulates rest and relaxation, and it gives people a sense of control. Remember earlier, Ken was talking about control and fear and anger. This helps to jumpstart that sense of control very easily. Another thing that people quite honestly talk to me about all the time is about just their habits have slipped. So how can we be proactive with choice? We can help teach them that alcohol is a nervous system depressant. Even though it's a quick go-to for a lot of people, and they'll say, oh, I'm so tired, or oh, I don't feel good, or oh, I'm depressed. What happens is that alcohol starts to really affect the body psychologically and physiologically. It slows thinking, which leads to depression. And it might be seductive. This is one of those things that many times when I do these quote pulse checks with people that I work with who are in the grief journey. I'll say, hey, let's do a pulse check today. I'll say, let's talk about your day. They're like, oh, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, around 3, which turns to 2, which turns to 1, which turns to breakfast. It's a very slippery slope. And I say this respectfully, that we need to be aware of this slippery slope. And to Elisabeth's point, to not be judgmental, not be critical, to be in compassion and empathy with our brothers and our sisters who experience grief and their grief journey in their own way. And this can impact nutrition as well. I found this, there's great work out there. Julie Daniluk is somebody I follow on Instagram, and I can put together a slide for you or a resource sheet for you on different people on Instagram and Facebook or books or whatever on great work. But this is a slide. It talks about certain foods can encourage your body and your brain to produce the neurotransmitters and the hormones that help to keep you happy and calm and positive. So one of the things that happens quite often when I work with grieving people is this. I'll say, well, what'd you eat today? What'd you eat over the last week? Like, let's just talk about that. And they inherently the first time get so irritated. Like, Dianne, I came to talk to you about my feelings. What are you asking me about my food for? And here's why. Because when they hit the Starbucks, sorry, I shouldn't have said that brand, but sorry. Anyway, there are some creamy items that are sugary out there that have coffee in them. They have those items and they're down the hatch. And then by 11, they're looking for donuts. And then by 3, they're looking for something else. And then by 7, and then by 9. And then this becomes a pattern. Why? Because your pancreas starts to really look for this sugar as a way of stabilizing its emotions. But what happens is many times the grieving, when I talk to them and they're saying, I feel terrible, I'm so sad. And if I talk to them at 4 and they've sugared up in the morning until midday, then by the time I talk to them at 4, or you all in terms of your grief counselors or your psychologists or just your friends, when you talk to them at 4 and you're feeling terrible, what happens is many people don't ask, what have you eaten all day? It's that you've done this, you're on the sugar train. So of course you're going to feel horrible. Of course you might feel sad or more sad than normal. It's because nutrition is a part of how we heal. And it's a natural part because of satiation, right? We understand that it's very calming to have food that crunches or is sweet or whatever, but it's important to understand that nutrition is a part of our grief journey. Choose your drug. This is one of my favorite slides, and here's why. Here's what happens. I get on the phone with somebody and we're doing a virtual grief visit, and they're like, my sister, brother, friend, neighbor, so-and-so is different now. And to Elisabeth's work, if you remember back to what Ken was saying, that other people's opinion is about them. It's not about you. So other people may be uncomfortable with the death of your loved one. Other people may be uncomfortable with your grief. Other people may not know how to relate to you. And that is okay, because there is not one person for all seasons of our life. It's okay to say, this person is okay with death. This person is not okay with death. I had a personal grief journey myself years ago, and a loved one was sick for a very long time. And in that journey, I had one neighbor who you would think would be loving and kind and participatory, and that was not the case. And it took me personally a long time to sort of get used to the fact that it was my expectation of that person. That person was still loving and kind, but just couldn't cope with death. But they could help me with my grief. So that person was first in line then. So when we go through our grief and our end of life journey, it's important to choose your tribe, and then give those people that are not really able to cope with a certain part of the journey the ability to just do them. Elisabeth's work also alludes to advocacy. Advocacy is very, very healing for people. And what that looks like is volunteerism. It can look like helping a neighbor. It can look like making muffins and bringing them next door. That's acts of kindness. All of these organizations that you see right here, the Lane Thomas Foundation, Creative Visions, Miss Foundation, MAD, and Austin's Kitchen Garden, they were all started following the death of a child, each one. MAD is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. The Lane Thomas Foundation was just announced yesterday. I don't know if you're aware of it, but that's the little boy who was at Disney World and a gator attacked him and killed him. His parents announced yesterday that they started a foundation that would help encourage organ donation in children. That would really help to save the lives of all of these other children. The Miss Foundation is incredible. They are, I think they're global, right, Ken?
Yeah, I think they have lots of chapters all over the United States and around the world as well.
Yeah, they help bereaved parents who have lost a child. Austin's Kitchen Garden was started because Austin Gray, my son, died, and we started a project to help feed 47 orphans in Kenya. And because it combined all of the things that my son loved. Creative Vision started the death of, was started by Kathy Eldon following the death of Dan Eldon. And MAD was created by a family member who lost someone, obviously, to a drunk driver. Which leads us to faith. And by the way, this is so typical. I do these presentations. Do you hear that in the background? You can nod if you hear it. That's my dog, Child. She's 81 pounds making her nest. I'm sorry. Anyway, Elisabeth also talks a lot about faith. And this is a matter of choice too, because faith is not stable. And I have found great criticism and great acceptance when we come to this issue of talking about faith as part of the grief journey. Elisabeth wrote, in faith, you remember that no experience is wasted. Everything you go through, every windstorm in life, it happens so that the perfect you can be born. And remember that God and the universe are not ultimately just working on the situation. They are working on you. And I find great peace in that. Situations don't happen out here just externally. Okay, something's going to happen. That we're all in concert with each other. Also, too, what is possible in choice is finding meaning after loss. I did a presentation about 10 years ago and tremendous amount of research on meaningfulness and purpose. And basically what that means is that we can start to look for meaning, but that meaningfulness and meaning following death, and even in other lifetime situations, can change for us. What I might assign meaning to, or you might assign meaning to now, that meaning might change in 3 years, where you at first might have said, oh, I get it. This is what that means to me. This happened in my life so that I would learn X. Well, 3 years from now, you might look back and say, oh, I thought it was this, but now it was that. It's all a part of the journey, and it's all fine. And Elisabeth felt that should you shield the canyon from the windstorms, you would never see the true beauty of their carvings. How beautiful is that? How prolific. If we shielded that canyon right there from the windstorms, we would never get to reflect on how beautiful that is. And so it is with life. To Ken's talk earlier, some of the most incredibly happy and purpose-filled people I know are those that are impoverished, those that have endured rape, those that have endured all kinds of trauma, childhood trauma. Why? Because they've been able to take their hardship and turn it into grace and turn it into purpose. Which brings me to post-traumatic growth. So all of those things that I just talked about, if we put them all in a bucket, they're to lead us towards something called post-traumatic growth. And I share this with you because I am absolutely astonished every year at how few people talk about post-traumatic growth, but it's a real thing. And it's science-based, okay? Like again, I would love to say that this was my idea, but it is not. This is science. It's really important to understand this. Here are the things that can result from post-traumatic growth, and then I'll go a little deeper to explain it to you. Spiritual changes, personal strength, relating to others, appreciation of life, and new possibilities are all a part of post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth, very basically put, is that bad things happen to people, and choice helps us to grow, to look at not only in the rearview mirror, but to look forward and to say, this happened to me, but this is who I'm choosing to become because of it. Here are the basics. Post-traumatic growth fosters hope. It gives us hope that there can be a better future. It can be considered both as an outcome, right? Something out here that's going to happen, but it's also deemed a process. It's about maintaining a sense of hope that not only can a person who has experienced trauma survive, but they can experience positive life changes because of it. And the reason I want to share this with you is maybe you haven't experienced trauma or real life-changing loss, but you might know somebody that does. And to tell them that post-traumatic growth can happen and it can be something that they can experience and be a part of their journey brings people a tremendous hope. So many people have never heard of it. They're like, what is that? I'll find out more about this. And then they want to do the work to see what it involves. It's not just an event that defines post-traumatic growth. It is a part of the journey and can develop. And though it's not mentioned above, surrender. Elisabeth wrote some beautiful, prolific things about surrender. Surrender is a part of the root of growth. And this is terrifying. People who I've worked with over the years, and Elisabeth writes on this too, are often all about control, right? Because we know that that's what fear does. Makes us want to bring the blankie over, and I've done it. We've all done it at times. And we go, I'm going to control this. I'm not going to let anybody in. Somebody's going to take advantage of me. Somebody's going to, It's all this out here. But instead, surrender can be a part of our healing journey. We can learn to open up a little at a time. Surrender is like ending a game of tug of war. We simply let go of our way. We learn to trust in God or in the universe. We just let go. You know, one time after my son died, and I'll never forget this, it was January 4th of 2007. For me, surrender occurred when I had a, dream, right? Which I don't feel it was a dream, but it was I heard God in my sleep dream space simply say, "Go and be sad no more." Now, that wasn't my language that I would ever use, and especially that concept was foreign to me, but it was a part of surrender. And that became a stepping stone for me towards surrender. So surrender doesn't necessarily happen for people like a light switch. It can be a little toe in the water, little steps. But I think Elisabeth was prolific. And what she said was that surrender, it's like ending the game of tug of war, because trying to maintain control and trying to hold on to fear, it's stinking exhausting. And when you talk to people who have let go of fear and tried to grow in their love over fear, they learn powerful life lessons about surrender. And surrender forces us to ask, and if I am not angry and at war with my grief and my loss, or at war with change, then where is my loved one, right? One of the things I'm asked so often by the grieving is, well, I hold on to my grief, and if I let it go, then where am I? Right? They hold on to the grief so tightly, as though that's going to keep the memory of their loved one closer. And when we can help them let go and surrender and rise in their love, we learn that this loved one is there. So here's something, I'll do this with you all as a practice, and then I'm going to wrap up my part of the presentation so we can do Q&A, and you can use the chat box below for the Q&A, and Wilka will help with that. Here's what I wanted to explain to you in closing. So I just talked about surrender. A lot of times people will ask, well, if I let go of my grief, where am I and who am I? Right? As though the grief and the anger helps to keep the person close. And Elisabeth wrote about this quite often. So when I ask people, and I'm going to ask you a question and then you answer it to yourself, I want you to think of someone that you love that died. Okay? Got that person? You can nod, I can see you. Okay? Think to yourself, what is it about that person that you loved? What is it? I'm guessing for most of you, and I can see many of your faces here. I have a grid screen. So when you think about that person that you loved, was it their teeth? Shake your head. Was it their teeth? Was it their hair? Was it their skin? Was it their sense of humor? Was it how they loved you? Was it their interaction with you? So you're talking about things that are between you, right? And so that's love, right? Love is between you. Most of you didn't say, I loved their teeth. That's the part that dies. The teeth die, the hair dies, the skin dies, because that's how cells are created. Cells are created to disintegrate. Hair, skin, nails, and that's what mommies and daddies create together. They create cells, but they don't create souls. Soul, we've never had a physician that can do a soul transplant. We've never had an analytics company, and I work for one, that can measure the soul in terms of so many centimeters. We can't do it. We cannot measure the cell. We cannot do a soul transplant. Yet People believe with their whole being that when a person dies, that is the end. And it is not, because what each of you just said to yourself was that in relationship, the thing that you missed was the sense of humor, was connection, was love. And love is energy. You can feel it, right? When the person is separate from you, but you still think about them, there's connection. When that person is in the room with you, you feel that love. That love is between you. That's energy. So what do we know about science? We know that energy is neither created nor destroyed, ever. Proven long ago. So if love is energy, and energy is neither created nor destroyed, where is love? It's everywhere, right? It's everywhere. So the love of our loved ones that have died is everywhere always. Think about it. The love of our loved ones is neither created nor destroyed. It is everywhere, always. So Elisabeth asked us to use symbolic language to connect. And it's thinking, it's feeling, it's sensing that love that is all around us all the time. And this might be something that makes some of you uncomfortable, but it is a part of the work of Elisabeth, who really believed there is no death. There is continued relationship. There's great research out there called Continuing Bonds in a book called by Dennis Klaas. And we can continue. I can still talk to my son's spirit and energy. You can still talk to your mother, father, brother, sister, friend, loved one, dog who passed. Because love never dies, and love is connection. You will always be the son of your mother, the daughter of your father, the friend to your friend. Those relationships don't change just because one person died. That connection does not stop because it's rooted in love, because you didn't love this, right? In essence, the ultimate lesson all of us have to learn is unconditional love, which includes not only others, but ourselves as well. I included this, and Ken talked about it also, because very simply this: if you're on this call and you're trying to understand grief, in part, it might be because you're grieving. And the grieving can be the hardest on themselves of all. So I'm asking you to include yourselves in this circle of compassion. And remember that love is your superpower. Beautiful people do not just happen, as Elisabeth said. She said the most beautiful people we have known are those suffering defeat, known suffering, struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion and gentleness and a deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. It's true, right? Some of the most extraordinary people I know are the ones who have gone through the most horrific loss, and they have literally clawed their way up and out of their grief cycle. Doesn't mean that they won't ever grieve again, but they are truly beautiful, compassionate, empathetic people who have learned a new way of life. So I want to thank you so much for being a part of this presentation today. I want to thank you for being here on your Saturday. We're going to have some Q&A time. And just thanks for kind of opening your hearts and your minds. And most of all, thank you to Hospice Atlanta for inviting us here today to share this time with you. And thank you especially for the beautiful work that the hospice providers do year-round. It's incredible. I don't know who we would all be without you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We will pass the mic to Dorothy as we have 10 minutes of our official time for this session, and we will continue with questions and answers. But if you need to leave right on the half hour, please be assured we are recording the session and you will have access to this recording as soon as we upload it and share the link. So you can leave and then check out the presentation later at your leisure. And so I'll pass the mic on to Dorothy now, and then we will move on to our question and answer section.
Great. Thank you so much, Wilka. Thank you very much, Ken and Dianne, for everything that you shared with us in this last hour and a half. It has been very touching to me personally. I'm sure for many of our employees who are on the call, to our volunteers, to folks we've not met and who are not necessarily a part of Hospice Atlanta, but a part of this work, the commitment to the journey, to love and to be present in our life and to bring forward the hope to ourselves first and foremost, but to the people that we love. Thank you. This has meant a lot to me. I also want to just say thank you again to Barbara and to Denise and to each of you for being here, for making bereavement something so important and a centerpiece of our organization, to creating spaces for an event like this. Thank you. And I think we are going to continue the work of creating spaces, not only in our day-to-day work at Visiting Nurse Hospice Atlanta, but also through our bereavement program, and to share with each of you the work of staying connected and in community. We all have experienced loss, whether by death, but also just living, and the choice to be present in our life. Thank you for the reminder. So I do want to say, for those who are local in Atlanta, we do have a bereavement, our Camp Start in Faith bereavement camp. We're hoping and are planning already for that in November. Please check our website. Also, our social media post will include information about our upcoming bereavement camp in November. This really is one of our cornerstones of our bereavement program, where we actually get to be in a circle in community together. And our volunteers, many of you on the call today, commit a lot of your personal time and your own heart to be present with others. So thank you. We also have a golf tournament that we are doing in June that really is a part of our support and donations that are generated to ensure that we at Hospice Atlanta are supported and support our Camp Stars for the ongoing work. So we'll also share that information. We believe very much in this work. And again, Barbara, thank you. Denise, thank you. And for Ken, Dianne, and Wilka, thank you very much. This has been great.
Thank you, Dorothy.
All right, here we are. So this is our time for questions and answers. And so we invite you to write in the chat whatever is coming up for you that you would like to hear from Ken and Dianne about. And I will read out the questions for them so they can just be present with you. I'll take myself off of the screen so that I can just manage the questions. Thank you. Let's see. So here we are.
We've answered every question possible.
There's some messages of thank you, as you probably have seen on the chat. But we would love to go into dialogue with you.
So one of the things that, okay, go ahead.
There's a question from Christina. Any thoughts you can share for dealing with loss and death due to COVID when we have reminders, cues, and triggers each day?
You want me to do
Dianne?
I love when the other part of the screen offers me up. Actually, so first of all, I'm sorry that that has impacted you. It's really a difficult thing because you're right, there are triggers everywhere, right? And I would say this. I would say it's really tough, but I would do a digital digest. I would separate from the digital world a little bit every day. It's really hard to stay present and to stay on level with constant bombardment of images. You know, one of the things I didn't have a chance to talk about in this presentation is that people are typically, when you look at learning styles, they're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learners. Those are the three main learning styles. If you are a person who is a visual kinesthetic learner, which impacts approximately 80% of the population, the images that you see via the news, via social media feeds, those are going into your brain as a constant flood. It also changes your levels of serotonin, okay, in your brain, and dopamine. It hits this dopamine receptor right here, so it becomes your food, right? It's hard to stay balanced if this food is constant reminders that COVID exists, death exists, loss exists, this. It really is impacting your brain and impacting your body on a consistent basis. So that would be one thing. Another thing that I can say too regarding COVID is to look to groups like Hospice Atlanta in your area, organizations that are doing grief support and reaching out. There are some great grief programs out there, that most of which that are free, by the way, that help people deal with grief and death and loss. And regarding fear of COVID, this is a very real thing too. And Dorothy, thank you for posting that. You know, there is a lot of grief and a lot of fear that has to do with COVID. So how do we not let fear override real life? Again, that has to do with a fine balance, right, between digital input and real life experience, and asking yourself, what are my fears? I'm not suggesting in any way to be anything less than mindful that COVID is a very real thing. But to Elisabeth's point too, I think it also begs us to do an investigation of our own thoughts on the fear of death. You know, did you live as fully as you could? Did you live in the I coulda, shoulda, woulda? I should have let this person know that how much I loved them. I should have written them a letter. I should have called them. I didn't get a chance to tell. Do those things now regardless. Call them, reach out. I think that's kind of helpful. I hope this helps just a little bit.
I would also say that everyone processes grief differently, and especially in the West, we're kind of taught that, you know, we've got to get through it as quick as possible, and it is a long process. You can't just go to a camp or a workshop or anything and be through it. So, you know, be easy on yourself and realize that, you know, it's a long road, and don't push yourself through it artificially, but take the time to really seriously digest it. And I think everyone processes it a different way. Some do it verbally, some do it non-verbally, some do it through journaling, some do it through hobbies, some do it through, you know, exercises or working with a grief therapist. But I would go out there and look at some of the different grief groups, because they have very different approaches, and, you know, they're not all the same. And I think that one group can't necessarily help you through the process. You know, maybe you take a little bit from the EKR Foundation, you take a little bit through the MISS Foundation, you take a little bit through Michael Hebb and Death Over Dinner, you know, you take a little bit through Death Cafes, and there's many different groups out there, and you have to find what fits you and what feels right, what feels authentic to each of you, because again, you know, the grief is unique to you, and you find out who you resonate with. You know, I resonate with Dianne or Joanne Cacciatore or Open to Hope group, you know, so there's a lot of groups out there, and begin doing the research and see what resonates with you and your soul.
You know, Ken, on that point too, you hit on something, and I'm just going to share a personal story. So when my son died, in 2005, right? I wanted to go and volunteer. I'm just hardwired that way. So somebody asked me if I would volunteer for hospice, and I said, I want to do this. And I called the hospice, and they said, how long has it been since your son died? And I said, 3 years, and I'm ready. And they said, you're not quite ready. What's long? Come on now. So here's what happened. I reached out to Open to Hope, which you can find them right online, opentohope.org. .com, I think it is. They have thousands upon thousands of free articles for people. I couldn't do grief support groups because I lived in a part of the country where we have a huge retirement base. So those grief groups at that time met during the day. And I couldn't leave work, wouldn't leave work to go do this. So for me, organizations that provide online support and now Zoom support, like other organizations, including Hospice Atlanta and all kinds of groups, provide grief support at night and during the day and things like that. So Gloria Horsley of Open to Hope informed me that it might take as long as 7 years, which I didn't want to hear. But for me, that was the truth of the matter. So I think understanding that grief can have a very long tail is helpful.
Right.
Like
you've got to start the journey, right? You've got to like take the first step, whatever it is. And don't be afraid of making mistakes because, maybe you want to do it in your own space. So you want to go on YouTube, or maybe you want to do it with other people, or, and you'll go through chapters where something worked and then it won't work because you're in a different space. So realize that different things are going to work and then not work. And then you have to find other things that work in this process. That will take 7 years or more.
I want to go back up. I can see something from Angela. I think I need to, where'd it go? I think I need to go to a grieving group. I want to share this with you. If you can't find a grief group that works for you, for real, no kidding, get together with some friends virtually. Call your friends. Go on Zoom. Go on FaceTime, connect. And here's why. Part of the thing that's really been hard in this time of COVID, it is compounding grief. I mean, the weight of it is just like this, right? To the other person that asked about COVID is isolation. It's brutal. So try to reach out. If you don't find a grief group, find a circle of friends. And as friends, one of you might know of somebody or of another grief group that you might like to join. So I hope that helps. Wilka?
Yes. Let's see. Laurel Ann asks, when grieving a person with whom you had a difficult relationship, how do you process the grief when your energy and relationship was not loving and you are still grieving?
Ken? Want to do that?
You start.
Okay. So how do you process grief with somebody with a relationship that wasn't loving? Is that the?
Yes, that's right.
That's a tough one. And I'm just going to put it out there. It's hard, right? It's not easy. I'm not here to tell you that grief is easy, be unconditional love. No, it is downright ugly, but I can give you a practice that helps. Journal. Start writing it out. Doesn't mean mail it, but write it out, and write until you can write no more. Write. Let the anger come out of you, because that anger stuff down in there is toxic. Write a letter, even if the person has died, write that letter. Here's why I'm mad. And by the way, and did you know, and it could be an ongoing letter until one day you just don't feel that you have anything more to say or that you need to say it. The process helps inform the outcome. The process helps to rewire the brain because it's coming out of you. It's not staying locked in there in a little cubby. I suggest that exercise is also really good for this, to get rid of anger. It does start to rewire the brain. It's amazing how many times I can hit a tennis ball against the wall.
You talked about expressing anger in a healthy fashion. I play the drums, so when I get mad, I go play the drums. So that's a great healthy way. It's exercise, it's musical, and it's constructive. So it doesn't focus the anger on anybody else, but there's many creative ways to express anger or grief that don't result and dump on other people.
Oh, and to Ken's point too, just then, and to answer your question, another thing that is healing, and this is science-based and proven, is music. Music rewires the brain in a way that nothing else does. Nothing. Okay, this has been proven over and over and over again. And by the way, if you know someone that has Alzheimer's and you want to watch an incredible video, watch a film called Alive Inside. It's incredible, and it shows the way that music can touch the brain and really impact our lives. But music impacts grief. Some of the greatest, most prolific work of all time in music has been written by people who suffered and endured profound, deep grief. So I would reach out, I would just volume up and dance in your house.
I would also say that, you can't really go back and fix a relationship with someone you've lost, but what you can do is focus on the people who are still with you and focus, issues you have presently in the present tense or in the future. So, I can't fix that relationship with so-and-so that died, but I'm going to take lessons from that. And I'm going to focus on making the current relationships even healthier so that if I do lose them, that won't be compounding my grief with losses I've already had.
That's true. And to your point, Ken, too, in terms of focusing outward on relationships, include yourself. Part of the thing that we've seen happens with people in grief is, I had a horrible relationship with someone. I am angry about it because they died. And now what do I do with all this anger? Seek help, seek connection, focus all that love and love yourself as much. And I'm not kidding. Take little sticky notes, put them on your bathroom mirror, put them on your refrigerator door, put them on your cabinet door. I love me. It will be okay. Because remember, 80% of the people are visual and kinesthetic learners. Okay, so that imprinting is happening every time you see a message. I'm okay. I'm not okay, and it's okay. Whatever version of that you like, but really work on loving yourself. And that's not being selfish. That's not being self-centered. That's saying, I am so bleeping angry about this and about the love that I did not receive from that person. I choose me. Just for a little while, I choose me. And also to just so that you all know, the grief support groups, I was just looking at Dorothy's note here, their grief support groups are all on social media. If you are a Facebook or Instagram person, you can find a ton of great content and Zooms and different work. And the Hospice Atlanta group is on Facebook. Wilka?
Okay, Laverna asks, can you talk about hope and how to start to bring hope at the beginning of the death and dying journey?
Read that one more time.
Can you talk about hope and how to start to bring hope through the process since the beginning of the journey of dying and into death?
Yes, I did great research on this. I'm looking for my book. It's actually on the floor over there. There's a phenomenal book. It is called, oh, rats. It's right there. It's by Kathleen Fanslow-Brunge. Okay. In it, she studied Elisabeth's work and then she wrote this amazing book. And in it, she talks about the stages of hope. And in it, you can ask someone, what is your hope? Do you have hope for a peaceful passing? Hope for a cure? Hope for treatment? What is you can open that door earlier on in the process by asking, what do you hope for? And they'll tell you. And their hope will inform you of what stage they are at or what phase they are at in their own journey. If they're saying hope for a peaceful passing, right?
And who is that speaker we talked about yesterday who spoke at Stanford?
Chris Feutner. He's from CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Chris Feutner's done some amazing research on hope. If you're a clinician and you're on the call, he does great work. He's a friend of mine. He is a prolific researcher, super fascinating work on hope. And the other one is Kathleen Fanslow-Brunge. Brunjes.
Can you maybe type that in the chat so they have the
Yeah.
spelling?
And if you give me 1 second, I'll grab the book. Hold on. It is incredible. Next question.
All right. Liz asks, how do I go through a grief process and the various emotions without having a negative impact on my child's well-being?
I think if you're going to grief groups and participating in death cafes and so forth, I mean, that's a way to isolate it out of your family so that you're expressing your grief outside of the home system.
Yeah, that's a grief groups are a great way to kind of separate, but I appreciate this question and it's really important.
Also
And
death cafes, I don't know if that's popular in Atlanta. Do you have that or no?
no, it's not that it's that a death cafe is different. They're not for this. What I think that Liz is asking about is first of all, kudos to you for asking the question, because what that tells me, your question tells me that you love your child. When a parent stops to be brave and ask this question, it says, I love my child so much, I don't want my deep, profound grief to put a veil over them or to impact them negatively. So this is a long, I'm happy to get on a call with you. And if any of the Hospice Atlanta people are there too, and they want to hop on a call after, sometime next week, we can do a deeper dive on this. But here's the thing, in its essence, of course, your grief will impact your child's well-being in one way or another. Your love does, so your grief will. They're not separate. We grieve because we love. So the more that we can encourage children to understand that our deep, profound sorrow is because we love someone so, so, so much, it lessens fear. It shows them that grief is normal. And the more that we can teach kids this early, they're going to have dogs that die. The fish dies. The goldfish you get at the fair. Kitties, friends, especially in this world of social media, they're all aware that death is a part of life, right? So we can teach them early on, grief and love are of the same bowl. So when mommy cries, don't be afraid. We don't need to fix it right away. Mommy cries because mommy's sad. And sad is not bad. Very simple language, very short sentences depending upon the age of the child. Development work, actually, Hospice Atlanta may have still some grief work that I did that has to do with developmental stages and ages of children and grief and understanding. I'll have to check. But the gist of it is negatively impact. So here are the things that we know impact children. Violence toward a child. Anger directed at a child that is due to grief. Grieving parents understandably have a short fuse sometimes. You're a human being. You're human. And I think to really then stop and redirect and speak with compassion and empathy and explain your anger or grief is important. But to Ken's point, seek guidance, seek loving support, but continue to communicate with your child on their age level and within a comfort zone. Does that help? Dorothy, would you like to add anything to this?
We have to unmute you, Dorothy.
Yeah, I think sometimes the hardest thing I do every day is figuring out how to unmute myself on social, on all these virtual platforms. I don't have anything to offer. That is lovely. I think that's very true and important just to say the words again and be reminded of how much connection and love matter, to let go.
They do, but also to the point of the person that asked the question, you obviously love your child because you asked the question and you were brave in this forum to ask it. Feel free to reach out via email, and I can help you find some resources too based on where you live. Barbara started family camps. Barbara Hospice Atlanta started family camps with Barbara's guidance, so that the family could be together and share in a weekend to help kind of bring some of that grief up to the surface so that it can start the healing process together in a healthy fashion. Camp Aaron is all over the country. Camp Aaron is a family grief camp that happens where there's a Major League Baseball city. So that, if you're not in the Atlanta area, check for Camp Aaron in your area also. I hope that helps somewhat. And again, this is a condensed answer to a pretty big, important question you asked. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. It looks like this is the end of our question and answer section.
Wait, can there, Wilka, there was somebody who up the feed asked a question that was really, it was about depression. Can you scroll up a little bit? And I saw it. Yes. Funny how that works. Was it a Fred, somebody? It was further up. I just wanted to make sure that his question specifically was answered.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have not seen that. No, I don't see that question.
I missed that one.
It was there, Fred Mabry. Anyway, we'll look for it, and I can find your email so I can answer you directly, because it was a question and I don't want to overlook that.
And of course, you're welcome to contact Dianne and I anytime for any question. Just write us either through the foundation or our personal emails, which, did we share them yet? I think I shared my email with a few people, but I'll share my email. And Dianne, if you want to put on yours.
Sure.
And maybe it was a question directed at you, because I just went through the chat and I don't see it.
Okay, I'll find it. Thank you. I'm putting in my email address here.
Okay, so I just received the question. So thank you, Fred. Fred asks, depression can be hard to overcome, as can the inertia associated with it. Can you address this?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question. So this leads me to another question, which doesn't help you directly right at the beginning, but so you asked, depression can be hard to overcome, as can the inertia. So what I would ask anyone to kind of seek some guidance and some help with is true clinical depression. So clinical depression is different than the type of depression Elisabeth talked about in her work. Elisabeth wasn't addressing clinical depression. So if clinically depressed, that empowers one to say, I think I'm going to go get some clinical help. I'm going to go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist or someone that is a physician able to help me with my clinical depression. That's different. And to that point, if you think that you might be suffering or coping with true depression, I'm the first one to say, go get some help. Go ask. At no time in history has it been easier. You know why? So many physicians are doing clinical visits online. You don't even have to leave your house right now, thanks to COVID, right? Which I don't mean to bless COVID for anything, but that is the one good thing that has happened out of COVID, is that now we can do telehealth visits, right? And make sure that you're seeing someone who is really good. And by the way, if you go to a counselor or a psychologist or psychiatrist that you don't jive with, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. That happens all the time, okay? It's kind of like dating. You get to know somebody, you connect with them, you don't. You get to know a counselor, you connect with them, you don't. Move on and find somebody else. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're going to like what they say all the time, but there truly are spectacular counselors and grief counselors and psychologists out there. Now, to your point about inertia, this was a great question. And here's the thing. It's really difficult, but it's achievable. But it starts with you. And the other thing that's important about inertia is an accountability buddy. My sister-in-law has been my accountability buddy on so many things. Ken Ross has been my accountability buddy on other things. We all know who can help us, right? To kind of stay on path. I can help some people with stuff that I can't even do myself, but I'm a great accountability partner on some things. So I would say when it comes to inertia, find a buddy and have that person be the one that says, hey, I'm going to call you at 9:45 and I'm going to make sure that you go. Okay? Lovingly, of course. Kindness is important. So I would say accountability buddies, but also too about inertia. I'm a fan of schedules and charts. I'm a visual learner. I'm practical. I want the little checkbox. I draw smiley faces for myself when I do good. And then I just sort of don't do anything when I don't do so well. But you know what works for you. Practical, 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 simple, one step a day. And I know this sounds crazy. Water is so healing. If you are feeling a sense of inertia, start with a shower by 9 a.m. or whatever the magic hour is for you. Start with water. It gets you going. Drinking it, showering, bathing, being near it, whatever it takes. It helps reset and retrain the brain, and it helps break that cycle of inertia. I know it works because I had it too for a little while. I think we all, not depression, but real true inertia following the death of my son, until I used the force of everything. I had the earbuds in my ear for my chosen music. I exercised every day. And that, for me, that was power walking for 30 minutes till I was just, the grief came. I was the person sobbing while I was power walking, but it helped. So I hope that helps a little bit. Wilka, there's another question I saw.
I think it's a comment for you, Dianne. And, you know, we're coming to the time where we have to close.
Okay.
So I think, you know, I'm going to include Dorothy onto our screen. And from my part, thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful session, and I'm happy to have been able to help facilitate it. And so I just invite the three of you to close our session today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And again, what a great way to spend a Saturday, to stop and hear and really engage in some truth and in people's hearts, and to be reminded of the power of unconditional love. So thank you all. It's great, great day to carry and share this with everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Can you just, Dorothy, one more time real quick, where can they find you on Facebook? Is it at Hospice Atlanta?
So yes, it's at, we have visiting nurse. We have two different accounts, Hospice Atlanta. That is, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter. we're on whatever, and about the only one, Ken, is we're not on Snapchat. But we are on platforms. Just search Hospice Atlanta, and you could follow us. That's great, and we really would appreciate growing our network so we can continue to get our message out. Also, share our bereavement groups through those avenues in our camp. So appreciate you guys joining our network.
Dorothy, if I could here, I wanted to share with everybody, you will be receiving a follow-up thank you letter individually to your own email, and it will share what Dianne, what Ken, and what Dorothy just shared. It'll share their direct email that they just kindly shared with you. It'll share about what Wilka, what you had shared, that as soon as we are able to, the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation will be posting channel of the recording of today, and it will have the emails in one place. So that was what our gift was as a wrap up at the end, because when we are doing such a dynamic session and event like this, it is hard, and you do want to capture those details and go back and go a little deeper. So we just wanted to rest assured to all of you that you will be receiving that email just shortly after our event today.
And I just want to add a personal note, thanking Ken, Diane, and Wilka. And it was great. We appreciate it very much.
Very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you all.
Enjoy your day. Thank you, Ken, Diane, Wilka. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.